Robert Altman was no spring chicken in 1970. He was about to turn 45 when his feature film MASH was released in theaters on January 25th. But he had spent decades working in television, directing shows like Combat and Maverick, and had made a mild impression with his previous feature film, That Cold Day in the Park, in 1969. By 1970, the movies were ready for Robert Altman, and he seemed to appear to them fully formed. MASH became a sensation. Audiences loved the stinging anti-establishment critiques, his loosey-goosey approach to cinematic norms, his playful manipulation of accepted genre and structure. In the height of the Vietnam War, Altman delivered a comedy with bite and set it against the thinly veiled backdrop of the Korean War. He encouraged improvisation. He made the background actors prominent. He dared to overlap and layer dialogue. These were just a few of the revolutionary acts that made Altman the maverick of 70s cinema. And unlike much of the nihilistic films from the early part of that decade, MASH was actually a crowd-pleasing entertainment.
I think you will find these accommodating. They're quite dry.
Don't you use olives?
We do have to make certain concessions to the war. We're 3 miles from the front line.
This is the story of two indispensable military surgeons. They had the army over a barrel. But did they take advantage of it? Yes. MASH, a motion picture that raises some important moral questions. And then it drops them.
What are you two hoodlums doing in this hospital?
Well, what's the matter with her today?
Look, Mother, I want to go to work in 1 hour. We are the pros from Dover.
Somebody get that dirty old man out of this operating theater.
And then give me at least one nurse who knows how to work in close without getting her tits in my way.
I wonder how a degenerated person like that could have reached a position of responsibility in the Army Medical Corps.
He was drafted.
The film takes place in a field hospital during wartime. The central characters are two brilliant surgeons, Hawkeye, played by Donald Sutherland, and Trapper John, played by Elliot Gould, but really, the entire ensemble is the star. And what an ensemble it was. Robert Duvall, Sally Kellerman, Michael Murphy, Fred Williamson, Bud Cort, Corey Fisher, and Tom Skerritt, the acclaimed actor who first met Altman during his days in television.
The studio hated that film, and they wrote it off before it was ever finished. They wanted to fire him and all that, and he's telling me all this stuff, and all this approach to making unorthodox material from based on who you are.
Were you aware while you were doing that movie, not only that you were doing something different, because I'm thinking about the overlapping dialogue and the unusual structure and setting of the film, but also that you were doing something slightly dangerous?
Absolutely, both dangerous and that we had something really worthwhile, and I was only aware of that because of my experiences with Bob Altman. I mean, what he said, the way he did it, who he was and how he approached it. So that was very much that was all I knew. I didn't have any other frame of reference. So when he started doing this stuff, it just somehow came to me, and I didn't know quite. He was shooting. It certainly was an unorthodox approach to filmmaking, but I saw it really as his chess game. I know a great chess player when I see it, and this is one of those guys. I said, he's just making some moves that I can't explain either. 2 weeks before we finished the film, I said to him, we got something here that I can't explain, but it's something very, very special, Bob. And he said, yeah.
It's an approach to filmmaking that I adore, because I think today, as complicated as many of the studio movies are, you have to pre-plan so much, and you feel like you've made the movie before you've made the movie. But I remember an interview years ago with Altman, and they were asking him about his upcoming movie that he was about to shoot. And they said, what is it about? And he said, I don't know. I haven't made it yet. There's the spontaneity of discovering while you're doing it. But I just love.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what I feel about what I do. Is I don't know. So how are you going to act it? I guess we'll find out. This business we're in is just taking the risk of possibilities and not thinking about whether you're going to win or lose or be the best or the worst, but just simply the experience of doing it is really, in the end, what it's all about. It's what you learn from it. And that's what really, I think, what I learned most from Altman and from Ashby. They both had different personalities, different approaches, but they were going at it with, I don't know what this is going to, I have no idea how this is going to turn out. Studios hate to hear that.
Yeah.
One of the things about him is he embraces everybody, the cast. They both embraced the cast and the crew and made them all feel engaged by asking them what they thought about something. What do you think? Is that too hot or is that too cold? And everybody in MASH felt totally engaged. And probably I remember telling Donald and Elliot, I said, about 2 weeks before we finished, I said, we're never going to have another experience like this one. And they didn't really know what to make of that because they saw it differently. They were a little bit more orthodox in their approach. And I couldn't explain what I meant by that because you'd have to have spent time with Altman.
While Tom Skerritt had previous experience with Altman, Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland did not. It's long been speculated that both actors attempted to get Altman fired from MASH, though it's a rumor that Gould vehemently denied in later years. It is true that both Gould and Sutherland were a bit mystified by Altman's outside-the-box approach. Why was he spending so much time coaching the extras in a scene? Why the flagrant disregard for what's on the written page? When you consider the time in which it was made, the film was filled with curiosities, from the comical recreation of the Last Supper to one of the first, if not the first, mutterings of the word fuck in a studio film, to the intentionally meaningless theme song, right down to the reading of each principal cast member's name over the hospital loudspeaker during the closing credits.
Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould, Tom Skerritt, Sally Kellerman, Robert Duvall, Joanne Flug, Renee Aubergenois, Roger Bowen, Gary Berghoff, David Arkin, John Chuck, Fred Williamson, Indus Arthur, Tim Brown, Corey Fisher, Bud Cord, Carl Gottlieb, Dawn Damon, Tamara Horrocks, Ken Primus, Danny Goldman, Kim Atwood, Michael Murphy, G. Wood, Rick Nealon, and Bobby Troop. Goddamn Army. That is all.
Actor Corey Fisher.
What Bob liked to do was, because he was so interested in creating a world and then going in and filming it almost the way a documentary filmmaker would, he liked to have a whole crew, a stable of actors, his posse kind of, who would inhabit this world and know how to contribute to the creation of this world without having to be told or what to do or have things written for them. So he'd be setting up the scene, say in MASH, where there's an actual written scene between, Hawkeye and Trapper going on, but he then tells 3 or 4 of us who are playing other doctors in the tent, say, hanging out. He says, go, I want you guys to be talking about how drunk you got the night before and what happened. And so we would go off and kick it around and sort of come up with a loose scenario for some dialogue. He'd listen to it and say, great. And then while the main scene was going on, he'd have us doing our dialogue in the background. And a lot of it would overlap. And he didn't always shoot in the traditional way of doing a master shot and then close-ups. He would often try to do things in one take with the camera moving. He kind of pioneered what they now call the walk and talk, where the camera keeps moving and actors move in and out of the shot as the scene progresses, which is very hard to do. It really requires ensemble work, teamwork between the crew and the actors. It's almost like filming a live event. And that's how he liked to do it. So he liked to create many layers of activity.
Author of Robert Altman, The Oral Biography, Mitchell Zuckoff.
I remember as a teenager seeing MASH, and I remember feeling as though, wow, are we going to get caught? This is just too cool. The anarchy, the anti-establishment, it was like the perfect adolescent boys, wonder world of what war must be like. First time I saw it, it was really, I saw it on the surface. I saw it as these raucous, rule-breaking surgeons who are so good and so cool, and they get all the girls, and they blow off the brass and they blow off the bureaucracy, and they're just the coolest guys you've ever, seen. And so that was my adolescent view of it. But as I got older, I saw it again, and I understood. And the thing that really blew me away was when I understood that there was a conscious mind behind this, a director's mind behind this, and that he was commenting on Vietnam through by using this sort of ruse of Korea, and the idea that he was speaking to so many other things about war movies. I mean, there's the idea that there's one gun that goes off in MASH, and it's to end the quarter in the football game, and that's against the rules of a war movie.
Film critic David Sterrett.
On a really sort of a crude level, you could say, a war is a war. And so you don't have to be making a movie about the war of the moment to be making a comment on the war of the moment. And, of course, the war of that moment was Vietnam. One reason why MASH is about the Korean War may be that it's based on a book, which is about the Korean War. But the Korean War was not that far in the past, from the earlier part of the 1950s, basically. So it's not that far in the past. And the Vietnam War was still totally, we were in the middle of everything. Nobody knew how it was going to come out. Nobody knew where things were going to go. The anti-war movement was extremely vigorous in 1970, but nobody knew whether it would prevail. So, in a way, making a movie about the Korean War was a war that was over and which had its own horrors, as all wars do, was, I think, a way of making a movie about something that was, in a way, settled, historically speaking, while using that as a way of comment on what was going on right now, which was not settled, historically speaking. I think it was a perfectly defensible decision, if not perhaps an ideal decision.
It was about war and about anti-establishment more than anything.
Critic Tony Macklin.
Everybody was against authority. They couldn't be trusted, and they didn't know what they were doing. Authority. So I think that's what really hit the mark, because we always question authority in different ways, but at that point, boy, it had become it was not just simmering; it was boiling. It had come to a boil in 1970, and so. Maybe another time it doesn't work. And it was so new. It was so fresh. It had originality.
This was the sign that new things were really brewing, and that we weren't just dealing with an eccentric artist doing an eccentric thing. MASH, in a lot of ways, is a real crowd pleaser, but in some ways it's really eccentric, and the eccentricities did not cancel out the crowd pleasing. People loved the movie, and that launched Altman, and it really launched helped to launch a whole new way of thinking about movies, that movies could be offbeat, even strange, and still really attract audiences if they were made correctly and if they kind of tuned into exactly the right wavelength.